Hey, how's it going everyone? It's Lee Halliday, and today we are learning all about Recoil, a state management library for React from the folks at Facebook, but it is experimental. In the video where they introduced it, they said they have been using it for almost a year across 30 internal applications, but it's very sort of early days for this library. But the cool thing is it's pretty easy to use. There's only about 4 or 5 main functions that you have to understand. And it feels very similar to using hooks like useState hook, for example. But what this would be replacing is shared state across your application. So that would be useContext, MobX, Redux, etc. So it's not going to replace your local state where you can just keep using useState, but the one you have to share across multiple components in your application. This is the app we're going to be building. It's a little shopping cart app where you can add some yerba mate or coffee to your cart. So we'll just click this and it will add it in, add some coffee in, and that updates the cart on the right. Then we can modify our shipping and the totals are updating below. So we've got a couple things going on. First, we've got shared state because we're sharing the state over here on the left in this component and also over here in the cart. But we're also doing some derived calculations. We're computing values from our state. For example, the totals here. They're a combination of the subtotal, meaning all the items in our cart, plus the shipping method I chose. So this component down here is basing itself off of computations from 2 separate pieces of state. So that's what we're going to be building, and we'll sort of learn some ins and outs of Recoil as we go. So I'll just save this to get us back to the starting point. And we've got this Create React app without very much going on, but I have already imported Recoil just so that you don't have to see me doing that in this video. And I've set up the inventory that we're going to be using. So it's just a hard-coded list of 3 items, the yerba mate, coffee, and tea, plus a hard-coded list of the destinations for shipping. And then we've got this one component down here at the bottom, app, which right now is just returning a div that says app. We're going to do everything in one file just so that it's easy to sort of wrap our heads around as we're learning this. And to get started, the first piece from Recoil that you would want to use is this RecoilRoot. So this provides, it's the provider, it provides the state for the rest of your application. So you'd want to only have one of these most likely, and you'll want to have it as high up in the component tree as you possibly can so that the rest of your components below that are children can access and modify this state. So RecoilRoot here right in the app, and in here we're going to create 2 components. Available items, which these don't exist yet, and then the cart. So why don't we just start by declaring these. So we've got function available items, and we'll just return a div that has an h2 that says that, available items. And then we'll do the cart below that. Function cart, return a div, oops. And in the div we'll have an h2 that says cart. Save that, let prettier, make my code nice. And this is what we got over here on the right, available items and cart. So what we're going to do first is start just by listing the items that are available, so that we can eventually add a button to add those into our cart. So we're going to start with a unordered list, and inside of there we want to iterate over this object. So in my opinion, the easiest way to iterate over an object is by using a function called object.entries, where you pass in the object you want to iterate over, so inventory. And that gives us an array of 2 things. Oops, help if I spelled right. That gives us an array where each element is, the first element is the key, and the second element in that array is the value over here. So we're going to map that array. So mapping here, and in here, each one, as I mentioned, is an array where we have the key, so we'll just call that the ID. And then we've got the value, which is name and price. So we can actually extract that out and just say name and price like that. So what we're going to be returning is the li that will have a key, and inside of here we can put the name, and then we'll put at the price. So let's just save that, and it's working. We can make it fancy. So I'm talking about $, but we can also just say to fixed to get those decimals showing up properly for money. So with our available items being shown, it's now time to add a button to add them into our cart state. That doesn't exist yet. We're going to create that in a sec. So here's our button, add, and it is going to have an on-click event that will fill out in a second. So very nice. So the way that you declare state in Recoil, and we'll just do it up here outside of our app at the top, is you declare it outside of your components using this function called atom. So we'll say our cart state is equal to the atom. And when you declare an atom, think of an atom as sort of one piece of state. You need to give it a key. So we'll just call it cart state and whatever its default value is. So we're going to have it as an object. And the way our state's eventually going to look is it's going to sort of mimic the inventory up here where we'll have like A, except it will tell us how many quantity we want for each of those items. So here we'd want 2 yerba mates, 1 coffee, etc. So that's our goal, to build a cart that looks like this. So with our state declared as an atom here, we can now come down here and use that. And this will look and feel very much like the useState hook from React. So we'll declare that, and we will say useRecoilState, which is one of those hooks or functions I imported at the top. And what you pass here isn't the default value like you're used to with useState. It is this variable cart state that we defined right up here. So this gives us back the cart and set cart like this. And now we can move into our button and worry about how to add one of these items into our cart state. So we'll do that just by calling setCart, and we'll take a copy of the current cart, and then we have to add in the item that you're clicking add on. So because it's a dynamic key, we can set this dynamically using squared parentheses. So the ID is going to be equal to, and there's 2 cases we have to take care of. Either it doesn't exist, meaning it's going to go from 0 to 1, or it does exist already and it will just increment whatever value it currently has. So we can check that here by saying cart at ID, so we'll look for its current value if it has one, or we'll say that it's 0 because it doesn't exist, plus 1, just like that. So it's hard to see whether it's working, right? So why don't we just quickly, and we'll remove this later, we'll put in a pre-tag where we'll say json.stringify our cart, make it look nice. So it's empty. Boom, we get A12, B12, C, etc. So with the add working, why don't we work on the remove? And we only want to show the remove button if that item already exists in our state. So what we can do is just say, check to see if the cart has a value. And if that's true, we're going to render out the button over here for remove. And when you click this button, it will call the function. And we now need to handle 2 different scenarios again, because either we're just decrementing the value by 1, so taking it from 2 to 1. But if it's already at 1, we need to just remove it entirely from our cart. So why don't we start by just taking a copy of the cart so that we can tweak it without modifying the original value at all. And we'll check to see first, are we at the last quantity in the cart? So if copy at ID is equal to 1, that means we want to remove the last value. So we'll say delete copy at ID if that's the case to remove it from our object. And then we can just set the cart to be the copy that now has had that value removed. We'll put an else down here, which means we're just decrementing it by 1. So what we can do here is we can say set cart. We'll just work with the copy, but we will decrement it by 1. So copy at ID minus 1. Let's test it, make sure it's working before we move on. So I add 1, I remove it, it's gone. Add a couple, it decrements and then removes itself. So you may be wondering why this blue flashing thing. In my React tools here, I have it set to like flash blue whenever a re-render is caused. And that's one of the advantages of using Recoil. It minimizes the number of re-renders. And I'll go into that in a little bit more detail later and explain why that would help versus something like useContext, for example. But because we only have one piece of state, it's hard to really demonstrate that right now. So why don't we now move over to our cart and we'll just display the values over here on the right. So inside of cart, I'm going to create a component called cart items. And we'll create that, cart items. So in here, we want to basically just get a read-only copy of our state of that cart so we can iterate over it and show the items in our cart right here. So we will do that by saying const cart equals, and we're going to use another hook that we imported. And the one we're going to be using is useRecoilValue. So you use this when you don't want to set or modify your state at all, you just want to read the value from it. And we say useRecoilValue for our cart state variable, and now we have access to it. And this component is now subscribed to the state, so anytime it changes, it will automatically trigger a re-render. So here we can do, why don't we say if object.entries for cart, or we can even just say the keys, length is 0. We'll just return a P that says no items. Oh boy. Like that. Okay, what did I do? Oh, it's keys, not key. There we go. So no items. So if we get down here, we know we have items, so we'll put them in another unordered list that we want to return. So we're going to iterate over our cart. So it would just be object.entries. And the entries are for the cart, and then we'll map those. So we get given the ID plus the quantity because that's the value that we're storing in our cart. And we want to return an li as a key of the ID. And then in here, we want to put the name of the item plus the quantity. So because we have the ID, we can access the name of it by just reading from this inventory object up here. So what we can do is say inventory at ID, get the name, times the quantity, like this. So we add 1, and then we get yerba mate times 1 showing up here on the right. Add a few more, remove them. And you can see it flashing blue as the state changes. It's triggering a re-render of this component over here. So that one is done. I didn't want that. Why don't we just remove this pre here because we don't really need this anymore. So save that. Cool. So the next piece of functionality we're going to add is to allow the user to change where the item gets shipped to. So we're going to create another component called shipping. And it will go down here. And shipping needs its own state. So before we get to that, we'll get to that in a second. We are just going to show the three different destinations that you can ship to. So we will return. We don't even need it in UL this time. We'll just return a div where inside of this we will iterate over the destinations. So again, object.entries for the destinations. We'll map them. And we're given two things. We're given the country, which is the key, and the price or the cost to ship to that country. Put that around there, and we will return a button. So our button will just say the country, and then at the price. Perfect. So US is 25 bucks, Canada is 35, etc. Why don't we give it an H2 that says shipping? Perfect. So now we need to add state to store which one the user has actually selected. So we're going to go up here at the top, and we're just going to define a new piece of state. So const shipping state is equal to an atom again, which has a key of shipping state and a default. We'll just say we start it to the US, like that. So down here in our shipping component now, we can read in this state by saying const shipping and set shipping is equal to useRecoilState, passing in our shipping state atom that we defined above. And now what we can do is come down here and we'll say if the country that we're iterating over is equal to the current shipping, why don't we show a span that has a check mark in it? Actually, spicy pepper, why not? Otherwise, we'll just say empty. Cool. So there's our spicy pepper. Why don't we put a space before it, like that. So that's showing our current one, which is the US, but we need to add an onClick event to change its value. So in here, we can call set shipping and set it to country, just like this. So now when I click Canada, it pops the pepper over to Canada, Colombia, US. So now is where I can start to show that the cool thing about Recoil is because you have like little pieces of state as declared of these atoms, whenever you modify them, it's only triggering re-renders on components that have subscribed to updates from those atoms. So when I change the shipping, you see it's only modifying this. And when I change the available items, it's modifying this plus this, but not the shipping. If we would have done this using useContext, and we had one single context that had both the cart and the current shipping, because they would be both reading from the same context, it would be triggering re-renders on all of those components, whether or not the value had actually changed in them. So you could solve that by having two different contexts, but that's now getting a pain. Imagine if you had 10 different pieces of state and you had 10 contexts, 10 providers. It would be a little bit of a nightmare. So this provides some advantages in that sense. The last thing we're going to be doing is showing the totals down below, which will be a combination, a computed value of multiple atoms, multiple different state values. So we'll create our function called totals, which will have a div that has an H2 of totals that we return. Cool. We will put this into our cart, like that. And now we're going to work with a new piece of functionality called a selector. So we'll say totals state is equal to a selector. So a selector is different from an atom in that this is a computed property based on other atoms' values. It's not state itself, it's just sort of like a read-only computation. You still need to give it a key, so totals state, except you don't define a default here, you define a get. And this is a function that receives a function called get. And then it's our job to basically return the computed value of that. So what we can do is we'll just start it off by, we're going to return an object that has subtotal. We'll just put in dummy values for now, a shipping value, and then a grand total. So we need to find these values here. So we find these values by using get. So what we can do here is we can say get the cart by saying get cart state. Get the shipping from get shipping state. So we could start to fill these in by saying destinations at shipping country is the shipping cost. Why don't we put this into a variable? Const shipping total is equal to that. We need to calculate the subtotal. So we'll do that by using a reduce subtotal. So what are we going to reduce? We're going to take the cart and reduce all of the entries in it. So we will say object.entries for the cart. We're going to reduce them. So reduce is a function that we'll get to in a sec, but our default value will be 0. And then as we iterate over all of the items in our cart, we'll start incrementing this total value here. So to reduce, we're past two things. We're past the current accumulated total, and then the second one is the item that we're iterating over. So because we used object.entries, this is an array that has a key, and then inside of the value side, we have our quantity. So down in here, did I do this right? Hopefully, we'll see. What's it telling me? Expected a return value. Cool, that's fine. So what we're going to do is take our current total, the AC, and then we're going to add in the price of the value times by the quantity. So we can get the price by saying the inventory at the key, or we could say at the ID, multiplied by the quantity. Okay, so now we have our subtotal, we have our shipping total, and our total is our subtotal plus our shipping total. Cool, so that was a bit of a mouthful, especially this reduce here. I have an entire video on reduce if reduce sort of trips you up a little bit. I'll link to that in the comments below. And in that video, we went over 10 different ways you can use reduce, so it should give you a good overview of how reduce works. So now that we've set up this selector, which uses a computed value of our two different atoms, our two different pieces of state, we can come down. Where did I declare this thing? I'm going to move this down closer to the totals, like that. We can come down, and because we're just going to be reading from this selector value, we can say const totals are equal to useRecoilValue, and it's the value of totals state. And at this point inside of totals here, we have this value that we returned from our selector. And the cool thing is, this is subscribing to any changes to either the cart or the country that we're shipping to. So it's looking for those two values to change. And when they change, it will trigger a re-render of this totals component below, because we're subscribing to it by using this useRecoilValue inside of here. So why don't we say the subtotal is equal to $totals.subtotal, and we can just say toFixed to get it looking nice. Perfect, so it's 0. If I were to add 1, oh damn, Not a number. That's bad. So I did something wrong. But what did I do? Oh, I know. This, the inventory at the ID, is this entire object here. I don't want the entire object. I want to multiply it by the price. I think that's the issue. Dot price, not a number. All right, there we go, 10 bucks. Cool. So as I add more, it's multiplying by the quantity, and it can add more different items to the cart. And you can see the blue little border showing up that it's updating here below. So we'll just do the same thing for the shipping. And then we will do the same thing for the total. But total is more important, so we will make it bolded by wrapping that around the total. Cool. So we'll add some yerba mate, tweak our shipping. We'll send some yerba mate to Colombia. And then down here on the bottom, we've got the total showing up. So no matter which piece of state I'm changing, either the shipping, which triggers a re-render of just these two components, or the items in the cart, triggering a re-render of the cart and the totals, but you can see that it's not triggering a re-render of this shipping here. So I think one of the main reasons they created this library Recoil is because imagine you had like 1,000 different items that are all updating independently. You don't want to have to create 1,000 providers and contexts so you can tweak them without triggering re-renders. But you also don't want to have all 1,000 in one single piece of state, because then anytime any of the 1,000 items change, every single component is going to re-render. So with Recoil, you could have 1,000 atoms, and you can tweak those atoms independently, and it will only cause re-renders on the components that have subscribed to changes for those atoms. So that was it for today. We've got Recoil from start to finish. We covered the RecoilRoot, atom, which is your state, selector, which is for computed values from your state. useRecoilState is when you want to both read and write to that state, and useRecoilValue is when you just want to read a value. Hope you enjoyed the video. Take care. Bye.